Thanks everyone for joining us. As I said, unusual for us to have a session on a Friday morning, but thank you for indulging us. We've got really big news that came in overnight about South Africa being removed from its red list. SATSA and its industry partners like Westgro have been working really hard to lobby the British government since May to have South Africa removed from the red list. We've worked with the Turner partners in the UK, and the lobby sought to provide UK politicians with a soft landing to advocate on our behalf. And we pulled together argumentations around science, the impact of conservation and communities, for example. So joining me to unpack this today, I have those people who were in the trenches fighting that battle. We have SATSA CEO David Frost. I think he's dialing in from Fan Court, so we're keeping him from the golf course. I'm sure he's going to have a great game today. We have Busi Mavuso, from the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, who we said was really the turning point for us in the last month or so to really raise awareness around what we were doing from a lobbying perspective. We have Monica Yule, the CMO of Westgro, who was the fearless leader, our chair of the Steercom. And we have Gillian Saunders, who is a tourism industry consultant, and she was the whiz behind the science. Gillian, I think you've become a scientist in the last, 6 months, essentially. Yes. So thank you.
And I'm a scientist.
You are a scientist now. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And this is an on-the-record session. So journalists, if you have any questions for our panelists, we'd love to field them. You can either let me know that you would like to ask a question by raising your hand using one of the non-verbal cues, or you can use the Q&A folder at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to pose your questions throughout the session. Very happy to take those questions, and we'll endeavor to get them all answered for you. And if you have a question after the fact, also happy to field those for you. So I'm going to hand over first to David, because David, really, you were the one in May who said, you know, we've really got to do something about this. The impact of being on the red list for South Africa's tourism industry is significant. Tell me why SATSA felt compelled to do something about this in May already, and a little bit about the appointment of Turner partners and the steering committee to get that done.
Okay, thanks, Natalia, and good morning to those folk who are joining us. So it actually goes back to January. You know, we had fought tirelessly as an inbound industry in the previous year to convince our own government to open our borders. And we got that right in October. We had domestic travel open since July. So we were looking forward to reaping the benefits of that. And then we went into quite a severe wave in December that was essentially driven by the beta variant. And as a result, we got put onto the UK's sort of red list. But what we found was that in the UK, other destinations and other countries were lobbying quite hard from middle of Jan onwards to put their case to the UK government about why they should be removed from the UK's red list. And we were sort of waiting for, I suppose, the voices that we would expect to be speaking on our behalf, and those are essentially government voices. So maybe Brand South Africa, SA Tourism, the High Commission, but there essentially wasn't, there just wasn't that voice. We're at the sharp end of the impact of this ban, and what we were doing was sort of racking our brains about how we could get involved in what would essentially be a lobbying effort in a foreign country. Now, none of us are skilled in it. I've certainly never done that before. We've done a lot of lobbying of our own government, but certainly to engage in a proper lobbying effort in the House of Commons, House of Lords, and to impact and start engaging with UK decision makers is something that was a little out of our sort of wheelhouse. We were fortunate enough to be put in touch with the Turner partners, and their two leading consulting executives were the corporate strategy lobbying team that was at Graham Mackay's side as he took South African breweries from a Joburg-based brewer to the #2 brewing company in the world over the last 18 years. And more than that, some of their current work, they were involved in the shutdown of Thomas Cook, massive travel group, and the relaunch of that. But essentially, they said, look, we can help you in this respect. We understand how the game is played in the UK, and we can assist you. And they put a proposal together that we then formed essentially a steering committee on the South African side, and we panel beated that, and we got a really cost-effective proposal from them that was basically a 5-month modular approach to trying to get us off the red list, targeting October, strangely enough, as the most likely date. And as you said, Natalia, because the Brits had been quite emphatic about this, they weren't going to flip-flop immediately. So we're looking at giving them a soft landing. So we were able to contract Turner, and let me just say that was in itself I think quite just a heartfelt and an incredibly poignant exercise, because we had to go to companies in the tourism industry that are literally on their knees and ask them for contributions. So it was really edifying that Westgro were the anchor sponsor in this project. They put a significant amount of money on the table that covered the first phase. Addy Enthoven from Yellowwoods, involved with Hollard, they owners of Spear, and have a share and beyond. He was amazing. He put a significant chunk of money in, and then we had to raise 800,000 rand, and that all came from individual contributions from various SATSA members, and indeed entities like Cape Town Tourism as well. So incredibly grateful that we were able to cobble that together within about a 10-day period, and this allowed us to kick the process off in early May. And formed a steering committee chaired by Monica very ably, but small. We also had ATA, which is a fellow tourism association that deals predominantly. They have membership in South Africa, but they also have a footprint into the African continent that SATSA doesn't have. But they are headquartered in the UK, and they were really useful in partnering with us as part of our steering committee to manage and drive the process forward. But in a nutshell, that's the genesis of the project. And then, as you say, we were able to interact, and the support that we had from business leadership, in which they wrote a very pointed letter to the UK Prime Minister that we were able to take into the media. To my mind, was and that was in August, and I think that was certainly a seminal moment, because it really galvanized. Almost the whole of South Africa came out behind it. There was support from Minister Pandor, Minister Sisulu, and very, very gratifyingly at the death, so to speak, our president going into bat and speaking directly to Boris Johnson on the matter. And then also just really, really importantly, our scientists coming out almost to a person to say that this is absolute folly, that the science is quite clear, and that's the beauty of science. It is clear, and that the data was so compelling and overwhelming that this paranoia that they'd had around beta was totally unfounded. It was anachronistic. It dated back to the December and January waves, and that it posed no threat to the UK. So it was amazing. I mean, we talk about a national incredulity, but I think the amazing thing is that it actually unified a country. It was like South Africans were talking about this in almost every quarter. And so it's incredibly gratifying that through this united effort, and that's one of the things that I think is so heartwarming about being South African, is that we have this ability. And as somebody said, it was actually Addy Enthoven, chatting last night on WhatsApp. He said that a whole lot of other countries should be eternally grateful to the effort that South Africa put up, because the UK took a swath of countries off. But the one country that the Transport Minister, Grant Shapps, mentioned was South Africa, because I think that our lobbying effort was I think it was a good one, and I think it was a noble one. So thank you.
Thank you, David. And yes, very much a Team South Africa effort. And those of you in the room who are media who reported on this doggedly over the last 6 months are part of that team, essentially. So we owe a debt of gratitude to you as well for doggedly pursuing the story and publishing what our scientists have said, publishing what the ministers have said, and publishing what SATSA put out there. So thank you very much for that. Man, if I can hand over to you, you were the fearless steercom leader who rustled us all together on Monday afternoons to make sure we got our stuff together and did what we needed to do. Tell me a little bit about the process that was taken to get South Africa off the red list, and very specifically we were talking about that soft landing, the points that were pulled out for the argumentation that were given to those politicians.
Thanks, Nats, and good morning, everyone. So yeah, I mean, I think right from the start, one of the reasons why certainly Westgro and of course SATSA and the rest of the crew that were working on this recognized the importance of the UK market to inbound tourism to South Africa and to Southern Africa. I mean, most tourists from international markets tend to not only visit South Africa, but tend to also want to visit one of the neighboring countries, be it Vic Falls or the Okavango Delta or Namibia or whatever it is. So we realized pretty early on that, this is more important to South African industry than it is perhaps to the UK policymakers. And therefore we wanted to demonstrate to them and showcase to them why it is important, and perhaps give them some considerations and some unintended consequences of their policy right up front. And one of the first deliverables of the Eterna Group, who I see are also on the call, so I just want to say hi and thank you, and well done. The sort of, obviously the economic argument around tourism is a very strong one for South Africa. I mean, it's been widely published that, the UK is the biggest international source market for South Africa, just short of 450,000 tourist arrivals pre-COVID, and a massive contributor to the South African economy as a result. Again, in terms of scale, if you look at the UK tourism market, outbound tourism market, of course, South Africa isn't a big one for them, but of course for us, it's lifeblood, So we wanted to make sure that they understood that. And then the second argument that we found really resonated in the UK, both in terms of the media as well as in terms of parliamentarians that we engaged in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, was the conservation argument. Both in terms of, the conservation angle itself, the fact that the tourism dollar funds a lot of the conservation efforts in those spaces, and that there's a great risk that businesses in that area would divest from tourism and go into other sort of industries if this travel ban continued and international tourism wasn't able to resume from our biggest international market. But also, the livelihoods around those conservation areas. A lot of those areas are, tourism is the only employer in that area, and one job there can actually feed a whole family of people. And again, we wanted to make sure that the wealth creation, the wealth pipeline that was created through the tourism dollar resumes and isn't disrupted irreparably. So those stories were very, very well received. And then, of course, the scientific argument, which, David already touched on it. I think one of the biggest challenges we had initially was that the beta variant was classified as a variant of concern. And Jill, I'm sure, will talk a little bit more about that. But essentially what happened out of that was that there was this, as it turns out, incorrect understanding of AstraZeneca's efficacy against the beta variant, which is why it got put in the naughty corner in the first place. And so, we pretty soon realized that from a scientific argument that it seemed as if the UK scientists weren't looking at the data that we were looking at. And so that formed a really sort of central piece within the argument. And then ultimately, of course, when business leadership came in, when you disrupt travel between a Commonwealth country such as the UK and us, it has massive impact on business. We have seen some investment, certainly in the Western Cape province, continue despite the travel ban, but you don't know how often the phone doesn't ring. So it's really difficult to quantify the lost opportunities of those disrupted trade routes. And lastly, over 30% of people that come to the Western Cape province from the UK are visiting friends and relatives. And frankly, the idea of a second Christmas in a row where these loved ones weren't able to get together just seemed unconscionable to us, considering how clear and patently obvious the science was. So that was really, in a nutshell, the playbook that we worked on with the Eterna guys.
And it literally was a playbook, essentially. I mean, that's a really great word, Mon, to use. The playbook was defined right up front, and there were some surprises along the way, but science was always a key area of focus. And Gillian, I'm going to pull you in here because you then eventually became an amateur scientist, working with all the different scientists, and we really do have to thank them for leaning in. Shabir Mahdi, Mark Mendelson, they were there the whole way and really, really helping us with the data. Gillian, tell us a little bit about the scientific arguments that were put forward, and yeah, maybe some of the highlights from your side.
Thanks, Natalia, and good morning to everybody. Great to talk through this process, which has been really like fighting in the trenches, as we've all been a team together for this period. So at the outset, back in May, we got a group of scientists together, and I have to mention that the TPCSA was also involved in bringing the group of scientists together. And as Natalia said, we had amazing scientists: Alex van der Heerve, Professor Lucille Bloomberg, Francois Venter, Jeremy Nell, Mark Mendelson, Glenda Gray, Ian Sana, anyhow, fantastic group. We also started interacting with Discovery, and Discovery's Chief Health Actuary, Emil Stipp, came on board to help us, and a few other scientists over the period. And they were giving me a lot of pointers as to where the information was that would support our arguments. And then they were assisting me in terms of saying, yes, Gillian, you can use that. It makes a lot of sense. But to be quite honest, with a bit of support from them, we went away and we looked at the science ourselves. So we had to look at the UK's criteria. So the UK's criteria at that point were along 4 areas. There was the rate of infection, which is the level of pandemic in South Africa, cases per 100,000, et cetera, et cetera. The population vaccination rate, I'm going to come back to that one. The reliability and accuracy of our stats, the status of our scientific community, and our genomic sequencing. So that was a 3rd criteria. And the 4th one, that was the big, horrible, scary one the whole way through, was various concern. So if we go back to just rate of infection, I think it's important to realize that on the rate of infection basis, our 2nd and 3rd waves were still not the highest waves. Throughout the entire process, we had lower infection rates than some countries that were green or amber. So those included countries like Germany, France, Greece, Turkey, UK, Netherlands, the US. So apart from slight blips here and there, most of those countries, Germany was the one that was probably the best and was lower than us for a few more days than others at the peak of waves. We had lower pandemic levels. So the rate of infection shouldn't have been an issue. We shouldn't have been amber from the start. Population vaccination rate, just to say that somewhere in September, sort of with not a lot of fanfare, the UK took this off as a reason, as a criteria. Nevertheless, we knew in May that this was not a winning place for us because we had very low vaccination rollouts in May. So that was a weak point. But in actual fact, if you looked at the UK, and maybe I should go back a step and say their criteria were never actually, they were opaque. They were not transparent. They never said actually what threshold were we looking at. Whereas the US, for instance, had very clear thresholds and also a matrix of how thresholds work together. So if your testing rate was higher, but your pandemic levels are lower, you were fine. The UK, everything was opaque. They just said they looked at this, they gave us no thresholds. But on vaccination rates, for instance, while Australia and New Zealand were exceptionally low on vaccination rates, they were still green and they were still amber. Well, they were actually green the whole way through. Why? Because the vaccination rate is really a proxy for the level of the pandemic at the destination. Your vaccination helps you keep the pandemic levels low. But if you look at us now, we have in Gauteng, for instance, it's less than 1 new case per 100,000 per day. So you're not likely, with or without a vaccine, to catch COVID. So vaccination was a bit of a proxy for pandemic levels, and the UK realized it and they took it off their criteria. Nevertheless, that was the message we were trying to tell them in the early documents where we were giving them on all of their 4 criteria, the reasons why we shouldn't be red listed. On the reliable stats, this one was like such an enigma for us because we have fantastic scientists. We have great statistics. We have the best genomic sequencing in Africa. We were between 23rd and 27th in the world in terms of our level of genomic sequencing. And if you considered us as a poorer country, a middle income country, and you adjusted for our GDP size, we were actually better than Canada. We were better than Japan in terms of the level of genomic sequencing we were doing. So it was a little bit like our own ability came back and bit us because our scientists were so good, they were finding variants. But nevertheless, we could put together a fantastic case that they should never, ever put us down or rate us down on our statistics and our genomic sequencing. So that comes to the big baddie in the room was the variant. And they had classified, if you go back to December, variants were a very new thing, and 2 variants made the headlines in December, the Alpha variant in the UK and the Beta variant in South Africa. And I'm sure you perhaps remember, ironically, The UK found the alpha variant because our scientists directed them to have a look at a certain mutation on the gene at the same time as we were finding the beta variant. So the UK scientists were actually assisted by our scientists to identify alpha, which at the time was worse, as it turns out, was a worse variant than beta. But the beta variant had automatically been seen as highly transmissible. So under variants, they looked at transmissibility, the effect of the therapeutics that were in use in terms of combating the disease if you had it, if you went to hospital, the vaccine efficacy, and the severity of disease. The problem with COVID is it's a very new area for science. So the assessment of beta was based on two very early studies. One that we ourselves had done, you probably all remember, Prof. Mardi did a study that found low AstraZeneca vaccine efficacy against the beta variant, very low. And we therefore sold or gave away our AstraZeneca vaccines. And at that point, that was the only data available about vaccine efficacy. On transmissibility, there was also one extremely, I believe, flawed early study done by modelers in the UK that said that we were, I think, 50% more transmissible, the beta variant. And that was the only data there was. When we started this work, the scientists were also saying with us, Gillian, that's all you've got. But luckily, during June, 2 studies came out that showed the beta variant's transmissibility was actually not particularly high. It was the lowest of the variants of concern, and it was in fact lower than some of the variants of interest. So we nailed the transmissibility one. Now we have one weakness left, which we acknowledged and we knew, which was vaccine efficacy, particularly only of the AstraZeneca vaccine. And there was no data because we didn't use AstraZeneca here. It was there was no beta in the UK, and we can look at reasons for there being very little or no beta in the UK. And in fact, we were on the verge towards the end of June of crafting a request to Public Health England for data from the areas in Kent and Southeast London that had beta variants breakouts and also had AstraZeneca vaccines to try and get their data so we could start to prove what everybody in South Africa, the scientists, were saying is that the AstraZeneca will be effective against the beta variant. But luckily for us, right at the end of June or early July, a Canadian study came out that actually showed, and Monica alluded to it, that there was 83% efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccine against beta. So here we are, early July, we have all of our ducks in a row, and then our scientists come out and say, but we're now a Delta-dominated third wave. So we, you know, that in theory, at that point, the beta argument came off the table. But unfortunately, the UK being the UK, and as you all know from what was in the press in the last sort of 3-4 weeks, they still insisted on being scared of beta variants for lots of different, well, for lots of erroneous reasons. They briefly put France on a sort of amber plus list because of the beta variants, which when you delved into the data, we're actually sitting only in Reunion, not in France. But the UK were particularly sloppy in how they looked at the data. We also saw that this week or last week, I think when Nick Crisp said that they were concerned about levels in the Northern Cape and had to point it out to them, there's only 2% of our population in the Northern Cape. So the UK were very sloppy or just not interested in looking at the data. Then, of course, as we became Delta prevalent, and I look back at the stats, by the 20th of June, we were 70% Delta. By the 4th of July, we were 83% Delta. And now we're up to 98% Delta most weeks in terms of genomic sequencing. The UK still thought we were a beta variant country. Delta was obviously not an issue because within the UK, they had the Delta variant dominance and they had freed themselves up internally on the 19th of July. No restrictions, no mask wearing, as many people in a nightclub as you want and at stadiums as you want. Why? Because they totally trusted their vaccines against the Delta variant. So if a Brit is vaccinated against the Delta variant and it's effective for him in England or her in England, it's also effective for him or her in South Africa because we have Delta variants. But this was a message that we struggled to, we did eventually obviously get it through with the help of various, with BLSA coming aboard, the media in the UK starting to get on our side in terms of the data. And there again, I think it's been an amazing process with the Turner. And I was producing a slide deck virtually every week with updates on all of our data, with all the statistics about Delta, about, and within it was always vaccine efficacy. And that grabbed a groundswell of both peers, MPs, and then the media in the UK, understanding that this was an absolute travesty of justice, that we were on the red list. So that was the story of the science. It's been a wonderful exercise in understanding and reading scientific papers and distilling out vaccine efficacy and all sorts of other things that I've learned about.
Are you going to miss the weekly updates, Gillian?
Yes, well, yes and no. You know what? I'm a data freak. My spreadsheet's been going since March last year, and I'm going to keep it going.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much, Gillian. Lucy, turning point. Oh my goodness. Once business leadership decided to join Team South Africa. It was just gung-ho and off we went. What does this removal from the red list mean for business in South Africa?
Thank you very much, Natalie. It's actually a very critical point, and I think it's very important for us, and we are definitely celebrating as a country and definitely as big business, in this country today after the removal from the red list. So, as you know, Natalie, South Africa has had long-standing, extensive trade relations with the UK. They are the fourth biggest market for our exports. The UK has, for the longest time, been a key trade partner for South Africa. And for the UK, South Africa is the largest trading partner in Africa. We trade natural resources, we trade beneficial exports, among other things. So the continued keeping South Africa on the red list by the UK wasn't really useful, on the trade relations side. And certainly it was having an adverse impact, in our efforts of trying to deepen relations, between South Africa and the UK, especially given the strategic role that Africa, or the strategic role that South Africa has, in Africa, that South Africa has in BRICS, and that South Africa has in the G20. So the UK is obviously an important financial market. We raise significant capital on the London's financial markets, and we have this important economic corridor, for exports and imports, with Britain exporting about 62 billion to South Africa, every year, or at least those were the figures for the year to March 2020, and while it imported about 90 billion rands. So we were obviously, worried as big business that the impact or the devastating impact that the red list or South Africa being kept on the red list was having was actually really undermining our economic recovery efforts. We know we've just come, or we are still in the COVID era, and the pandemic has had a serious devastating impact on the economy. And we are a country on the path of rebuilding. We are a country trying to look at how we put interventions in place to deal with our stubbornly high levels of unemployment, which are currently sitting at 44.4% in terms of the expanded definition, and youth unemployment sitting at about 75%. And we know that our labor market is characterized by mainly, low-skilled labor and unskilled labor. And it therefore means the tourism industry was critical in ensuring that they absorb these people, as it were. So we had to come to the party, as big business, because we are worried that whatever rebuilding efforts that we have put in place, up until then, were seriously being undermined. Many South African companies have a significant footprint in the UK and vice versa, and the ban was severely impacting, the trade opportunities. So we are sitting in an environment where there are serious lost trade opportunities due to the ban, and I think BLSA, therefore, from that perspective, deemed it fit to lend its weight to this very critical campaign, that the tourism industry had really been carrying, as David had illustrated, for quite a long time. I remember we had a conversation with the president of the country last week, Tuesday, and we pressed on him the importance of government visibly coming to the party, the importance of government, and of him in particular, reaching out to Boris Johnson, so that he can try and understand what exactly is the issue and what is it that we're really dealing with here. And he really gave us his assurance that he is, on the matter. The South African government is really seriously looking at this issue, and he has had conversations with Boris Johnson. So I think what we are celebrating today really is a serious collaboration between what the ministers, that were involved, Minister Pandor, and the others, that were involved have achieved, what the president, has achieved, what the business community has achieved, what civil society has achieved, And as you say, Natalie, what the impact of the media shining a spotlight on this critical issue has actually, achieved, as it were. So what this means really is that, the trade relations can definitely improve, between South Africa and the UK. As I said, the UK is the 4th biggest market for our exports. And if you look at the numbers, you will see that just for 2019, the UK ranked 5th destination market for South Africa, and the exports, for South African exports, and the 7th source market for imports. Between January and October 2019 and 2020, South Africa showed a trade surplus where the exports exceeded the imports with the UK. And for 2020, the trade surplus is doubled out of 2019. I think that while we are focusing on how we pull ourselves out of this economic rut, as a country, the increased trade relations between the UK and South Africa would really assist us to put interventions in place, as business, to say, how do we really ensure that our economic trajectory can turn the corner? How do we ensure, that we can utilize the opportunities that exist, between the SA and the UK, so that we improve our economic performance, so that we can start dealing effectively with the, economic ills and the social ills that we are facing as a country. And so that big business can go back to leading the charge, in terms of working with government very closely, driving, this economic recovery agenda, as it were. I think a lot of businesses would be at better ease in terms of probably maybe opening up their balance sheets and looking at how we increase, the investment. Certainly the businesses in the UK, in terms of how they increase the investment in South Africa, and how we actually expand our businesses as well from a South African perspective, from a trade, our relations perspective. So I think this is a significant milestone, in our economic story as South Africa, and it will augur very well, for what we are trying to do in terms of ensuring that our country and our economy turns the corner from an economic perspective. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a milestone indeed. So if you have a question for any of our panelists, please feel free to use the raise hand nonverbal cue or to type your question in the Q&A folder. I do have a few questions that have come through already. And the first one, David, is to you. How much money in rand value was raised or spent on the campaign to get South Africa off the red list from a SATSA perspective?
So the cost of the campaign was 1.5 million rand, or 74,000 pounds. We think it's incredibly cost effective. We're grateful for the Turner partners. I mean, essentially doing it, I would say, sort of at cost or even below cost in terms of what they would normally charge commercially. And as Gillian eloquently calculated it for us, I think in the beginning, and please come in if I'm wrong, Gillian, but it's the average UK spend is around 30,000 rand. So this basically equates, was it 30? How many extra tourists, Gillian? I mean, if we just
it was actually 20,750 rand, and it was 28 extra tourists. So 28 more tourists from Britain would have covered the fee.
Yeah. So I mean, it was a total no-brainer. It was cheap at the price. But I just think the important thing to note was there was no, we knew we had to do something, but we were charging into the unknown. But I think that's what I think the industry appreciates, is that somebody has got a back for you. And as South Africans, we were not going to just sit down and take it. We're not used to assuming a comfortable position. We've got to actually, fight back. And this was, as I say, a worthy and a noble cause because it was so, the truth was so evident in terms of what we were sort of putting on the table. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm going to allow Karen to talk. Karen, you can unmute yourself and pose your question.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Okay. I would like to know, how is the industry now going to prepare, obviously, for the expectation of the increase in visitors? So what's the hands on the ground sort of approach now?
Who wants to take that one? Mon.
Happy to take that. And thanks for the question, Karen. I think it's a two-tiered response. I think the first is that historically the inbound tourism channel works in a way that the tourists buy forward. That means that a lot of the businesses, but whether they be tour operators or hoteliers in the country and indeed the province, still have managed to hold on to a degree of forward book, which means that they are really just tourists that have been waiting for the removal of the red list in order for them to resume the travel that they had originally planned for last year. So that's definitely on the cards. From a Cape Town perspective, we know that British Airways is going to resume their flights to Cape Town on the 1st of November. And we've also spoken to some of the airlines. Virgin Atlantic has notably said that they're already pre-arrival of the lifting of the red list have already seen demand increase on their Joburg route, and they're still committed to a January date for the resumption of the Cape Town route. So the airlines are certainly getting ready. When we were doing the inbound lobbying last year, we had it on good authority from the airlines that they need about 10 to 14 days from, deciding to start flying to being able to fly. So hopefully we'll start seeing some increase of airlift as well as we go along. And then lastly, I think was having spoken to some of our, so we had two tour operators on the Steercom with us, one a B2C operator, one a B2B operator, and both of them have confirmed that even pre the notification yesterday, they've started to see a massive increase in bookings. In fact, conversion has returned back to pre-COVID levels, which I think is fantastic. We know that some of our lovely products in the Western Cape are currently closed. As an example, Test Kitchen's taken the decision to close, but we can also see that there are lots of new operators coming in, lots of new restaurants opening up, lots of new experiences coming through. The zip lines just opened. One of the world's longest zip lines in Mossel Bay has just been open. I mean, there's lots of fun things that you can now do in the province and indeed the country. And a lot of the tourism product has actually managed to make some sort of a living from the domestic market and from the domestic rand rather than the international dollar. So we're quite confident that everyone's all guns blazing and ready and waiting for the international tourists to arrive.
Thanks, Mon. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of WhatsApp messages as well telling me that the second the announcement was made, people have asked to reinstate their bookings for as early as October. So that lead time from booking to travel is a very, very short lead time now. It used to be much longer. Okay, so next question. Off the red list is one thing, but now vaccine certificates will also be recognized by the UK. How important is the South African government's newly launched digital vaccine certificate in this regard? Do you believe that the launch of the system played a part in South Africa coming off the red list? Jill, I think it speaks to science. Would you mind answering that?
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, the vaccine certificate is vitally important. And I think the UK sort of, when they put out that they didn't accept vaccines from a whole range of countries, including South Africa, in fact, including most developed world countries, wasn't really that they didn't accept the vaccine, it was more that they didn't accept the vaccine certification. And our little cards, and I see different people who've gone to different places, got different cards, and some have got this data on, some have got the other data on, was not acceptable. And obviously it could easily have been reproduced fraudulently. So the vaccine certificate is something that we've been pushing government for quite a long time, that we need to get ours going. And the launch, the launch that started this week, a little bit with a few teething problems, but seems to be going better at the moment, is fantastic, and we welcome it. I don't think it had an impact on us coming off the red list, but it has a huge impact on them accepting South African travellers into the UK with a vaccine certificate. So it's vital for that. And we need, while we're the inbound trade, and what we were fighting for was Brits to come here, filling the aeroplanes both ways is vital to getting the airlift on the route as well. So we always support the inbound and the outbound industry. The outbound industry also has a little, an economic impact and a footprint in South Africa in terms of employment, et cetera, et cetera. So it's still a vital component of the tourism industry. And we absolutely welcome this certificate. They followed the World Health Organization guidelines, which also only came out about, I think it was about 5 or 6 weeks ago, which we sent through actually from the Tourism Business Council to the Department of Health, and said, these are the guidelines from the World Health Organization. There's already guidelines from ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, and they work on the format of your visa, the format of your passport for all the machine readable documents for international travel. And luckily, the World Health Organization also worked with ICAO representatives in coming up with their guidelines. So they were synced. So while I'm not a technical buff either, I think that our certificate is in line with global requirements. I think there might be a two-step process to the UK, recognizing it in terms of actual reading of our, well, I'm not sure. I believe there's another 2 steps to getting it recognized by the UK, but we're close to that, and it is vital. But were we getting off the red list? I think the red list we were getting off already, and the Brits were going to be able to come here. This is the other step that allows South Africans to go to the UK.
Great, thanks, Gillian. Are you fearful of a potential 4th wave and harder lockdown and expected slap bang in December, the middle of the summer travel season? Does the attention now turn to the campaign around avoiding this, engaging government, encouraging vaccinations? Jill, perhaps you'd like to just give us some insight from Emile on that.
Yeah.
And
So
David, after you, Jill, David, if you could just talk about, what do we do as a tourism industry in terms of encouraging vaccinations, et cetera, et cetera. Jill.
Yeah. So a 4th wave there's going to be a 4th wave in the same way as the UK is having a 3rd wave with a highly vaccinated country, if you follow what's going on in the UK. I think there's 2 issues to it. One is that vaccines mean that people hospitalization and deaths and severe disease are rare, okay? And most people have it like you have a flu or the cold and you carry on with life. And that's what's happening in the highly vaccinated countries. So as we get more vaccinated, and I'll let David talk about that, but I'm encouraged that today we're on 33% of South Africans, adult South Africans have had either a fully vaccinated or 1 jab. So they've got some protection, and our vaccination rates have tipped up significantly in the last 7 days or the last 5 days since the president announced the campaign last weekend. So that's important. We need to get vaccinated. But also contributing to severity of disease and levels of infections is level of previous infections in the country. And our previous infection rates are estimated by most to have been higher than actually the official number. So the combination of our previous infection rates and our vaccination rates going up means that the 4th wave, Discovery feel pretty confident, and other people also think will be a small wave. So it's vital that we get our vaccination rates up. That will help keep the 4th wave the small wave. And remember that our 2nd and 3rd waves were relative to international ones, also on the small side. So we don't see that the 4th wave will come at a level. I am holding thumbs, but we don't see that it'll come at a level that would mean anybody would put us back on high risk levels or red lists again. And remember that we are likely to stay Delta dominated. The whole world knows that the one big black swan potential, baby black swan, I think the whole of COVID was the big black swan. Baby black swan is another variant. But there's been a number of new variants that have been considered as potentially variants of interest or variants of concern. One's called Mu, one's called Lambada. One was the one that was announced with a little bit too much fanfare for our liking in South Africa, C1.2. None of those have been able to dislodge Delta as the dominant variant. And so the scientists are cautiously optimistic that this thing has now reached its peak variant, which is Delta, and any new variants potentially won't derail our recovery, won't derail our vaccinations, and new variants will probably anyhow be susceptible to that. Vaccines will have efficacy against them. So it's not just us, but the entire world is seeing smaller waves or moving towards what we can see in the UK in the data, and Emile Stipp of Discovery has also shown this to us. In the UK, this is what should be considered an endemic disease now, the same as flu is in a year. So they have computed data that shows that, taking into consideration the vaccine levels in the UK, the death rate from COVID is now lower than the death rate from flu in a normal flu year with their flu vaccination levels. So it's no worse than flu. And that's when you just live with it. You vaccinate people every year with a booster, most likely, the same as flu is. And we need to see ourselves moving to that effectively, as long as we get our vaccination rate up. But in the interim, we're not seeing a high 4th wave coming, and let's just hold thumbs and hope that's correct.
Yeah, Emile talks about it being an exit wave, I think was the term that he used, an exit wave. So also just to let you know, Luke, the associations who are involved in the tourism and hospitality industry have all got behind something called Jab for Tourism, which is a campaign that everybody's working on to try and get their staff vaccinated. So the tourism industry as a collective is running a Jab for Tourism campaign to encourage vaccinations. I want to ask David the last question that Luke sent through, and he said, Great that government got involved in lobbying for South Africa's removal from the red list, but a bit late to the party. Do you believe that government should have gotten involved earlier, and that if they had spoken up stronger, it wouldn't have taken as long for South Africa to be removed?
So let me say this in answer to you, because I think it's a very pertinent and sort of key question. I mean, firstly, we're grateful that that we're off, and certainly the intervention of senior ministers and the president in this regard was seminal in I think shifting the UK's decision. I think the fact that they were able at very short notice to convene the meeting of scientists that they did essentially last week was a testament to that. You know, what is slightly galling is we were the only country that had to trot their scientists out, you know. But the good news is, as Gillian says, we have scientists to trot out, because if they tried to do this in Oman or in Egypt and some of the other countries that they took off before this, you wouldn't have had scientists to trot out. So there's a strange absurdity to the process. But you know, clearly it would have, I think, been it would have made a massive difference if we had an intervention, a proper intervention at the highest level earlier. But I think this really speaks to, it speaks to something, and I mean, Busi might want to come in at a more macro level on this, because I think they get it right but let me put it this way. I think they get it right at the macro level, and we need to be able to cascade that down. Tourism is the second biggest economic sector in the country, and when we say that, the impact tourism has is that it permeates into a variety of other sectors. So it's not just pure hospitality. You know, there's the job in banking that is there because of Forex. It's the petrol that gets consumed by sort of tourists, the food that gets used in and consumed. So, you know, then we go into safety and security. So we're dealing with, the sort of police and security matters. Home affairs is important, because that speaks to sort of ease of access. Now, what we see in other countries, and these are countries where, you know, tourism is important, but possibly not the second most important thing, is they have task teams within cabinet chaired by the president or the prime minister. So in Canada, in Japan, this is the way they roll. We generally still feel very much like the stepchild, like the sort of, you know, there's the tourism industry, it's something on the side. And what we would like to see is that tourism is taken a lot more seriously by government, and that there's an acknowledgement of these tentacles that go into other ministries. I mean, we are still bedeviled by things like the National Public Transport Regulator, where we are, you know, a very simple thing. Our tour operators that operate vehicles can't get their vehicles licensed. I mean, for 2 years, you know, it's absurd, you know. So, you know, these are issues. I still think there's a lot of work to be done on the issues of visas and e-visas and things like that. But what we would, you know, like to suggest is that we need a proper structured engagement. We do have conversations, but they tend to be one-on-one conversations. You know, the CEO of the TBCSA will have a chat to the DG, and whilst that's useful, it needs to cascade down, and we need to have technical discussions in a proper structured engagement. And if we had that, and we talked to each other regularly, and we strategized and we grappled with problems at inception and then executed jointly together, I think that would put us in a far better position. And I think if we had been doing that, we could have shifted this process earlier. But also, having said that, I think that the work we did and the process that we engaged with sympathetic politicians in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords certainly prepared the ground. It gave us a very clear understanding of what we were up against, because we were able to pose questions and understand the sort of nature of what the UK was doing. and what was informing their decision. We had a number of interactions with the UK High Commission in South Africa. I think we were bedeviled by the fact that there wasn't a proper High Commissioner in place. Nigel Casey, who the previous High Commissioner had been, we worked very closely with in opening the inbound industry, left in December, and Anthony Phillipson, the new High Commissioner, is basically only taking over now. So, you know, other countries like Kenya had a very active UK High Commissioner that worked closely with the Kenyan government and the Kenyan private sector to sort of get them off the list. But I can't emphasize enough, we need to work together. We still, in many ways in tourism, it's my sort of catchphrase, we're in different movies. We've got to get into the same movie, and it's very important in terms of how we work together in repositioning South Africa and do the marketing going forward. The private sector outspends government in marketing 20-1. So our government agencies are still so key and vital in this, but we need to do this where we sit down and, as I say, you know, strategize and think about how we can do it together. I mean, there was a meeting recently where the CMO of South African Tourism announced that they're doing a whole big global brand repositioning. And they're doing that without a single conversation with the private sector. I mean, it's, you know, it's almost laughable if it wasn't so tragic. So, you know, these are the things that I think we need to get right. So it was encouraging that Minister Sisulu had an industry gathering last week, and emerging out of that is that she was going to set up a war room around tourism recovery. But, you know, while it's encouraging, the devil's in the detail. Unless you have properly structured task teams in which key private sector people that can bring a real-time view of what's going on in the market, and that what we do in that war room is market-led and not government-led, I think we'll be missing a trick.
Thank you, David. And you segued beautifully into the question that Catherine asked, and I wanted to ask you about the priorities. So I want to ask of all our panelists as we close off, we've got 5 minutes left, the priorities in those of us in tourism looking forward, what we're going to be focusing on now. Getting off the red list was, you know, our universe since January, essentially. What are the priorities for us looking forward? I'm thinking removal of PCR requirements for vaccinated travelers. I'm thinking public-private sector collaboration. And if I can start with Mon.
Thanks, Nats. Yeah, so at Westgro, we have two sort of key priorities. The first is, of course, we are in the process of completing our UK consumer campaign for tourism, which will go live in Booking Peaks in January. And we're very excited to start launching that. So we are going to work really hard at making sure that Cape Town and the Western Cape remains top of mind for those British travellers. We've already been live in Germany and Holland for a couple of months because they took us off the red list a couple of months earlier. So from a reignition perspective, Westgro is certainly focusing on increasing the numbers into the Western Cape province and getting our tourism economy back to where it once was. And then, yeah, from a regulatory perspective, I think the most important thing for us is to make sure that we start recognizing other countries' vaccine status. You know, we were quick to criticize the UK for not recognizing our vaccine status, but ultimately we're not recognizing anybody's vaccine status either. So I think that's a big push for us. As I mentioned right in the beginning, it's also very important for us to try and harmonize those requirements with our neighboring countries, because at the moment, if you go from South Africa, you do Vic Falls, you do Botswana, that's 6 PCR tests before you can go back home, even though you're fully vaccinated as an international traveler. So I think it's really important for us, if we want to boost the economy to the Southern African tourism economy, it's really important for us to try and collaborate, not only, as David says, public and private, but also with our neighboring countries, and making sure that it makes sense for and is an easy process for international tourism to resume.
Thanks, you, Mon. Gillian.
So my things would be perhaps the more structural challenges that tourism has faced for quite a number of years. And I think David mentioned one, which is a strong public-private partnership. And he alluded to the other. It's what we call joined up government, or a whole of government approach. And the tourism industry globally starts to show that destinations, and you don't necessarily have to have a tourism ministry, but destinations need to have many ministries involved in making tourism work, because the tourism ministry itself, and I've looked at this in South Africa, has executive powers over exceptionally little that is actually required for the tourism industry to have an enabling environment. Best practice in many countries is an interministerial committee, often led by the president or prime minister. So you have Canada, you have Japan, you have France, you have countries like that, and that's how they manage tourism. And if you look at some of those countries, they've had stellar performances in growing their tourism industry, obviously pre-COVID, because that's been a problem. So and if you look at the things that hamper the growth of the tourism industry, the two biggest things at the moment sit in the Home Affairs and transport. So one is the transport regulator, which is under the Department of Transport, and one is e-visas. And the e-visa that Home Affairs is rolling out was confirmed as a meeting with government and stakeholders in the industry just over 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, is still one where humans actually review every single application. So the application is done online, but it still goes through what I would consider to be a manual process. So it's not what we would consider a world-class e-visa, but that's a Home Affairs budget, a Home Affairs capacity issue. And while we know we need all of these other ministries to come to the party to get tourism to have the right enabling environment to grow. So those long-term structural challenges are things we still need to address.
Thank you, Gillian. Busi, last word to you, our knight in shining armor who came to our aid a month ago. I know that tourism is just one part of your portfolio, but your priorities as business leadership, what are you planning?
I think we continue in our intensification, of our efforts, and focusing on rebuilding our economy, Natalie. And I think the removal of the red list by the UK was a critical piece in the puzzle. As much as tourism is but one of the industries that we're focusing on, but we know and understand it's important, in the bigger picture. We know and understand that it's got the propensity to absorb the many young people that are roaming the streets unemployed. It has the propensity to give opportunities to those women-owned businesses. And I think we've seen the president speak about opportunities to women-owned businesses, recently. So the tourism industry has got that propensity to do that, so there are better opportunities, for our people entailed in the tourism industry as well, so I think the focus right now, and as David correctly says, we need to shine a better spotlight on the tourism industry and how we actually give it better support, because I think it is one of the industries that are in a better position to assist us, as we try to deal with the social ills, that we're facing in the country, especially the unemployment and the inequality. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you very much to my panelists today, Busi, David, Monica, Gillian. It has been an absolute privilege to be in the trenches with you. I know how hard you have worked for this. Thank you for having the vision and the resilience to keep fighting, even though it seemed that we were not making progress at times and going backwards. Really, our tourism industry has a great debt to pay to you. And to everyone on the call who joined us today, thank you so much for indulging a Friday morning press conference. We promise you we will not do it often. Have a great day. We will send the recording to you guys shortly so that you've got access to it. And if there are any additional questions, please reach out to us and we'll get those answered for you swiftly. Have a great weekend. And David, shoot the lights out of Fan Court. Cheers, everyone.